In today's video, I'm going to attempt to create these really cool type-based animations by using TypeScript and creating a library to do this. Now, this is the very first time I'm trying to solve this problem, so you'll be able to see all of my mistakes and issues I run into, but I personally think this is going to be a little bit of an easier project, so hopefully this video isn't too long. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name's Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream project sooner. And today we're going to be attempting to create this really cool typing animation you can see on the right side of our screen. We're going to create a library for it, and we're going to be using TypeScript for this, so it's going to be really fun. Now, this project actually comes from my JavaScript simplified webpage. The landing page for this course has this typing section right at the very top, but I used a library to get this typing animation. I didn't write it out by hand. So as you can see over here on the left-hand side of my screen, I just copied over the code that I used to create this from the library, but I didn't import the library into our project. So as you can see here, we used a typewriter class in that library. You pass it an element, and then you pass it some options, and then all you do is you just say the strings you want to type, how long you want to pause for, what you want to delete, and so on, and then call start at the bottom, and it's going to do that typing animation for you. So this is what you would do with the library, but in this video, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to recreate this library and all of the methods that we use to create this cool typing animation on the right-hand side of my screen. Now, really quickly, I do want to mention that in order to save some time in this video, I actually did some setup steps ahead of time. So I just used Vite to create a basic TypeScript template. I just used their built-in TypeScript template. I added in a single plugin, which is this Vite plugin checker. That way, as you can see over here, we get all the errors. So if we go back to our TypeScript file, you can see that this is not defined and this is not defined. So we're getting some errors from TypeScript. That's all that plugin does. And I just deleted the code we don't need. So you can follow along with this if you want by just going to Vite and running that to create a Vite app and use the TypeScript template that comes with it. Other than that, we just have essentially some blank files to work with. So what I want to do is I want to create a typewriter file. We'll just call this typewriter.ts. And this is where all of our code for that typewriter is going to go. And for what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a class for it because, like I said, that's what the library used. So we're going to use the same thing. We're going to call this class typewriter. It's going to have a constructor inside of it. And there we go. And then inside of our inside of our main.ts, what I want to do is I actually want to use this. So let's just close out of these other files that we don't need for now. And I can just import that typewriter from typewriter right there. So now at least we have this being defined. All we need to do is make sure we actually pass the correct information into this. So this typewriter TS is going to come in the constructor here. It's going to take in an element, and then it's also going to take in some options. So this element here is just going to be, I believe it'd be called like an HTML element. There we go. So that's going to be the type of our element. And then our options, I'm actually going to destructure this because we have a few options we want to specify. The only one I used here is a loop, but the other ones you would maybe want to specify is like how quickly things are typed out to the screen. So we look over here, you can see the speed between one character to the next character. You probably want to be able to configure, and you also want to be able to configure how fast things are deleted. So we're going to have a loop variable, which is a Boolean. And actually, we could just give it a default. By default, this will be false. So this should automatically say loop is a Boolean. Then we're going to have like a typing speed, and that's going to be set to like 50, for example. So this is in milliseconds. And then we're going to have a deleting speed. And let's also set that to 50. And then we'll just set this to an empty object. Make sure I get my thing here correctly. There we go. So now hopefully that is all correct. Let's see, all these structured elements are unused. Yep, that's fine. Now if we come into here, we can just say like this dot element is equal to our element. This dot loop equals loop. This dot typing speed, typing speed equals typing speed. And this dot deleting speed equals deleting speed. There we go. And then I believe I'm getting this error because it doesn't exist on the typewriter class. I believe what I need to do is I need to come up here and say like element is an HTML element, just like that. And I need to do that for all of our different properties. And this is just because we're using TypeScript. We need to specifically say what type these things are. So I can come and say that this is a number Boolean. There we go. That is all we need for our constructor. So if we save this and come back over here, we should hopefully see if we define this as an element. So we can just say like document.body. There we go. We got rid of all the errors related to creating our typewriter. Now we just need to define these functions. So the main functions we have in our case is we have the ability to type a string. We have the ability to pause, and this is just going to wait for a while. We have the ability to delete a certain number of characters. And then finally, we have the ability to delete all characters and then start the animation. So we have like 5 functions we need to worry about. And let's come over to our typewriter here and just kind of start writing these out. So we have typeString, which takes in a string, just like that. We're going to have let's see, deleteChars, I think it was called. Yeah, deleteChars takes in a number, which is a number. Then we have deleteAll, which is going to take in a value. And this is like how long you take between each deletion. So this is like our delete speed. And this by default is going to be set to this dot deleting speed. There we go. Let's see if that worked properly. Yeah, that did. So this is already defaulting to a number since we're setting it to a number. So this delete speed by default, if we don't pass anything to it, is just going to delete at the normal speed. Otherwise, we can pass it a different value, for example, 10 here, and it's going to delete a bit faster. As you can see on the right-hand side, when it goes through and deletes everything, I have it delete much faster than I actually have it delete normally, as you can see there. So that's why this deleteAll has a value passed to it. We also have our pauseFor, which is going to take in a duration, which is a number. And we're also going to have a start function, and this does not take anything in. So there we go, that's all of our functions defined. Now if we come in here, you can see all these functions are working. Now all we need to do is to define our return type essentially. So every single one of these should just return this at the end. And the reason I'm doing that is because, let me just copy this down real quick, I'll explain. Is because if we look over here, we're just chaining all these methods together one after the other. So we're chaining typestring into pauseFor, into typestring, into delete characters. So by chaining these all together, if we just constantly return this, we're returning our current typewriter right here from this. So that way we can just constantly keep calling methods on it over and over and over again. And now if we save both these files, hopefully if we come over here, we don't have any more errors. Of course we do string is declared, but its value is never read. That's fine. We don't have any errors in our main TS though. We just have a couple warnings being like, hey, we don't have these values defined. They're defined, but never used essentially. So now what we need to do is go through and start defining some of these functions. So I kind of want to think about how this is going to work. Because if we look at our main.ts, it looks like we're calling all these functions. So we're saying, okay, we're going to type a string, but we don't type it right away because we wait until we call start. So what we need to do is we kind of need to create like a queue where we're like, okay, we're going to do this. And then after that, we're going to do this. And after that, we're going to do this. And after that, we're going to do this. And we're going to build up this queue essentially of items where we're saying from top to bottom, we're going to do these different things. And then as soon as we call start, then we want to execute that queue. That's kind of how I'm thinking about this. So instead of in my type string, function, normally you would be like, hey, add string to screen. Normally that's what you would do, but instead what we need to do is we need to add an event to the queue that tells us to add a string to the screen. So we need to create some type of queue that we're going to use. So up here we can just say like we have a queue, which is going to be an array. And we'll just set it like this. So by default, it's just going to be an array. Yeah, okay, that's fine. And then what we need to do is just use that. So in here, we would say like queue.push, and we would want to push in some kind of function that would run and add a string to the screen. So yeah, we can just create a function, I believe, like this. And inside this function, we need to do something. And then as soon as that thing is done happening, and then we can move on to the next function. So the best way to do that is to use promises. So I'm just going to return a new promise from here with that resolve and reject. There we go. So then as soon as I do this, so like, let's move this up, we'll add this string to the screen, and that's going to take a while because each character we type, as you can see, takes time. So this where do I start string is going to take a while to type out because each character individually gets typed to the screen. So while this is happening, the promise is just waiting, not doing anything. And then eventually we're going to call resolve. And when we call resolve, that's saying, okay, move to the next thing in the queue. That's kind of how I envision these functions working. So each one of these is going to do almost exactly the same thing. We're just going to add to the queue a function that is going to call resolve. Then in our start, we just want to loop through that queue. So we could say like this dot queue dot for each item. And I believe we should just call this callback because each one of these is just a function. We could just call that callback and we should await calling this callback, I believe. Yes. But we can't use for each. We can't await instead of a for each. So instead we should use like a for in loop. So we could say like let callback in this dot queue. There we go. I believe we actually have to do this of, because if we're trying to do a for each loop, a for of is essentially the same thing. And then we can await our callback in here as long as we make start an async function. Let's see, callback. The expression is not callable. Okay, and that's because up here we don't give our array a specific type. We need to say that this is going to be an array, and this array is a type of this function. So I'm going to create a specific type to define this function. We can come up here and say like type. What are we going to call it? Q callback. We'll just call it queue_item. And this is just a function that returns a promise. There we go. And you also have to specify the return type of your promise. And I believe, at least for our first promise here, our promise doesn't return anything. Our resolve doesn't return a value. So we can just keep this as a void promise. And then we can specify that this is going to be an array of queue items. Now down here, yes, callback is a function. That's perfect. So all we did here is we essentially said, okay, we have an array, and this array is a type of queue item, which means it's just a function that returns a promise. That's all this is saying. So by adding this to the queue, since it returns a promise, that's valid. Same thing here, we're awaiting this because it's a function that returns a promise. So we're just kind of looping through each value in our queue, and we're awaiting for it, and that's it, and then we're returning this. So I believe that should work. And instead of our type string, let's just kind of do something to test this out. We'll just say console log string. Sure. Let's see if this does anything. Go over to our app. Of course, we're getting errors because all this stuff is being declared but not defined, or declared but not used. So let me just console.log number. I'm just going to put a console log in here to make all these values be used. That way we at least don't have these errors. Okay, whoops. Duration, there we go. So now there's no errors, that's perfect. And it looks like it's not doing anything, so let's go to our console, because that's where everything should be printed out. And if we scroll up to the very top, you can see all of our number related stuff is being printed out. So our deleting, our deleteAll, our pauseFor, all those are getting printed out first. And then we're calling start. And then everything that we've queued up, which so far is just our typeString function, those are then being called. So each one of these in order is being called. So where do I start? Then function, temp, so on. Each one of these is being queued up in order and then ran in order. So it looks like that part is working. Now, obviously we need to make this function do something because just printing the string to the console is useless. So we need to use this element to add things to it. But instead of adding directly to this element, I want to create like our own element inside of this element. Because right now, as you can see, we're just passing up like the body. And the body, if we inspect here, it has other information in it. Like it has this script tag in. Most likely, if you have a real application, it's going to have a lot of stuff in the body. So instead, what we want to do is we want to create our own element that we're going to use in our typewriter. And then that is going to be where we add and remove everything from. And we're just going to append this element onto whatever we pass in here. So what I could do is I could say like our element is equal to document.createElement. I'm just going to create just a basic div. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this parent. And this parent here is going to get our element added onto the end of it. Just like that. There we go. So that should be all I need to do. And now we actually have our own element. So if I save here, hopefully if we inspect our page, we'll see we now have an empty div inside of our body. There we go. We have that empty div right there. And that empty div is represented by this dot element. So when we type our string, we can just do, this dot element dot append string, for example, and that's going to print the entire string out to the screen at once. As you can see, instantaneously all the strings show up. Not quite what we're looking for though. Instead, what we want to do is we want to slowly loop through each string after a set period of time. Best way to do that is going to be set interval. So we could just come in here, we could say set interval, and then we could pass down here our time, which is going to be our typing speed. So our typing speed, let's say, is 50 milliseconds. That's our default. So every 50 milliseconds, this function is going to get called, and we're going to add one letter from our string to our element. So we're going to say like this dot element dot append string at the ith element. And by default, we're just going to say I is equal to 0. And then down here, we're adding 1 to I. So what this is doing is we're just constantly adding an element to the end of our, or we're adding a character to the end of our element, and then we're incrementing I by 1 to get the next character and so on. And we're doing that every single 50 milliseconds based on this typing speed. Then in order to exit out of this, we just need to have a check that says, hey, if I is greater than or equal to our, string.length, then what we need to do is we need to return, because that means we're done with our string. We've passed the end of it. So we need to call resolve. Then we also need to clean up this interval. So we could just create a variable for that, and we can say clear interval, just like that. So now we're making sure we clear out that interval, and then we're saying move on to the next thing. That should be all we need to do to get the typing working. So let's save and see. And as you can see, each character is typing out one by one with a 50 millisecond delay in between each and every character. So that is working as we want. So we got typestring essentially done. At least I believe so. Now let's move on to delete characters. And I'm actually going to create a function, I think, to help me out here, because almost every single thing inside of our functions is going to do the same thing. We're going to add something to the queue, which is going to be a promise. So I want to create like a really simple function. We'll even make it private. And this function is just going to be called like add to queue. And it's going to take in a callback. And it's going to essentially call that callback here, I believe. Like it's going to pass that to our promise. There we go. Yeah, add to queue. It's going to take in a callback, and this callback is just going to be a function that takes a resolve. And what's the type of resolve? Let's see here. It is a, oh, it's a function, of course, that just takes, yeah, it's just a function that has nothing. So we can just say resolve is a function that returns nothing. That should work. Let me see here. So callback, we don't need to call it resolve. There we go. That should be what we need to do. Oh no, this is a function that takes resolve into it. Yeah. Because let me think about how I want to use this. I want to just say, for example, add to queue. I'm going to copy this code right here. Oops. Paste that in there. Get rid of that. Yeah, so I essentially just want to say add to queue to add this to the queue. So it's going to take our resolve. So it's going to take in a function that has one value. So this function is going to have the value of resolve, and resolve is a function that returns void. And this function also returns void. No, it's going to return, yeah, because it doesn't need to return anything, I don't believe. Yeah, we just call that resolve. Okay, I'm sure there's probably a better way to do this, and if you're like a TypeScript guru, tell me, because this seems kind of messy, but it could just be because I'm trying to type everything in line. But I think this should work, and I can clean this up a little bit like this, make it all one line. So there we go. Add to queue is just going to add something to the queue, and it looks like everything on the right is still working, so I believe that's good. Now we can move on to our delete character. So I'm just going to come down here, copy this, and we need to add to the queue something else. So for deleting characters is going to work almost the same, but we want to do our delete speed here. And then what we want to do is we want to take our element and just remove one character from it. So we're going to get the text content. Yeah, do we want to get the text content? I believe so. We'll get the text content from it. We're going to set that to our text content dot substring. Why is this? Why is it that element is possibly undefined? Or why is text content possibly undefined? Let me see here. Element dot text content. So what is text content? It is a string or null. Interesting. What about inner text? Inner text is always a string. I don't think it really matters too much. Let's see. So substring is going to start at 0, and we want to go to this dot element dot text content dot length -1. Let's see if inner text would work better, because at least this is always a string. Okay. So what I've done here essentially is I've said, okay, we're going to be looping, or not looping through, we're not doing any looping. We're just taking our current inner text, removing the last character from it, and then adding it back on. That's what we're doing inside of our set interval. And then we're going to be adding 1 to I every single time. And then if I is greater than or equal to our number, then we want to end this loop. That should be all we need to do. So let's save. It looks like it's working to delete characters. One thing that we do need to do to check this, though, is implement essentially white space. Because if we go over here, you can see that I'm using some new line breaks to make white space. As you can see here, there's some white space between these. So in order to get that white space to show up, we need to just add some styling to this. So probably the easiest way to do that, we're already importing a style sheet. So inside of here, I'm just going to say, we'll give this a class up here. So we'll say, oops, this dot element dot classlist dot add white space. Sure, doesn't really matter because we can just say white space pre. Do we need to call? Yeah, I think we just say pre. Now we'll do pre-wrap just so it wraps as well. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. That's adding in our white space. And I believe it is working. Not 100% sure. Let's come over to delete. I want to make sure delete works with deleting the new line characters as well. So let's change this to like 10 and see what that does. Okay, I believe it deleted all the correct characters because 9, or before we had it at 7, right? So it deleted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. When we change this to 10, which I think was what I had it before, it would delete 9, and then this question mark is 10. And as you can see, it deleted all the way up to the question mark on start. So that worked as expected. That's really good. Now we can implement delete all. I believe that's the next one. And this whole style sheet right here for white space pre-wrap, this would be something you would normally add to like, you know, an element you put this in, but we're just adding this on our body. So that's why we have it in our style sheet and we're doing a specific class here. I normally wouldn't do this though. Normally, I might as well just change it actually. Normally what I would do is I would come in here and I would go to our index and let's just say dot white space. And this is where we're going to add our stuff to. And then here, I would say, whoops, here it is. Document dot query selector dot white space. And this of course is possibly null. So I'm just going to say as HTML div element. There we go. Just to get rid of that null warning. And let's just save this. There we go. Now it's working. So that fixes the problem with having that class in here because I normally wouldn't do that. So this is how you would normally do this if you wanted this. Okay. Now let's copy this, delete characters, go into delete all because it's going to be essentially the same thing. Well, I guess delete all is going to be a little bit different because our delete speed is going to be determining how we delete instead of our deleting speed. The naming is not the greatest on these, but you know, whatever. We could change names later. And what I want to do here is I want to just make sure that we get all of our text removed. So I'm going to do the exact same thing here where I remove one each interval, but instead I want to just check to see if our inner text essentially has nothing in it at all. So we don't need to worry about this number. We don't need to worry about I here. We can just say this dot element dot inner text dot length equals 0. So if there's nothing left, then we clear the interval and resolve. That should work. I'm going to even preemptively minimize it to make sure. So delete, and then there's delete all. You can see it deleted much faster. And then we should have a delete all at the very end here. There we go. That's delete all working. Let's move on to pause, because this one's going to be pretty easy, I believe, since we should just be able to do a really simple set timeout. So instead of an interval, we want to do a timeout because we're just pausing once for our duration. And we don't need to do anything inside of this because it's just one timeout. And when we're done with the timeout, we call resolve. So I can clean this up quite a bit. There we go. Yeah, it doesn't get much simpler than that. And hopefully now you can see we're pausing when we get to those different pause points. Yeah, so you can see it's pausing there, and I believe we only had those pauses. So we have this first pause here, and then the one after each of those strings. That's really good. Now we should take into account these options for a loop, for example. So let's come into here. Yeah, we'll minimize this, and we got to take into account what happens for the loop, typing speed, and deleting speed. So we're currently already taking into effect typing speed and deleting speed. So that's really good. Next, we would want to take into account loop. And to me, the easiest way to loop would just be as soon as we finish executing a command, just add it back to the end of the list. So right here, we can just say if this dot loop, then what I want to do is I want to take our queue and I want to push this callback back onto the queue. So we're taking from the front of the queue and then adding back to the end of the queue, I believe. But that wouldn't work with a for loop. We need to use a while loop instead. I'll show you why. So if we save this, you're going to notice it's going to run all the way through, and then it's going to stop as soon as it gets to the end. I believe at least it's going to stop when it gets to the end because the for loop is just going to loop through this queue once, even though the queue has a bunch of things inside of it. Or maybe not. Either way, I think it'd be better to do this with a while loop because doing it with a for loop is just kind of unintuitive because the size of the list is changing, which is not always good when you're dealing with for loops. So I'm going to change this to use a while loop, and I'm just going to call this like current. We can just call it callback. It really doesn't matter. And we're going to get our callback by getting the first element from our queue, which I believe there's a shift function for. Yeah, this removes the first element from the queue. So this is removing an element from the queue, which is good. We want to clear out our queue. And then we're saying while this is not equal to null, and let's make this a let variable because we're going to constantly redefine it, just like here, because at the end of our while loop, we want to get the next element from the list. We're just going to move all of our code up into here. Now let's see, let me look at this real quick. So first, we're getting the first element from our list. That's good. As long as we have an element, we're running this code. So we're going to call the callback, wait for it to finish. If it's a loop, we add it back to the end of the list, and then we get our next element as the callback. So this should work fine, and it should loop. So let's just watch it first to make sure that it loops. And also what I'm going to do is I'm going to change our speed. We're going to say typing speed 10, deleting speed is going to be 10, just to speed this up quite a bit. Now you can see our typing is much faster, and it should hopefully, when it deletes everything, start back over from the beginning. There we go. That looked good. Let's change loop to false and make sure that it doesn't actually loop to make sure that our while loop worked. So typing, 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 delete, and it should stop. There we go. Okay, let me make sure there's nothing else we need to do. Otherwise, I think this is pretty much complete. So if we come into here, we have all of our functions being defined. I guess one thing we could do is these variables right here should probably be private. We should probably rename these. I wonder if there's like a, I think there's like a refactor. Let me see, rename symbol. There we go. I'm going to change it to element, just like that. And if we just hit F2, that's the shortcut. So I'm going to do that for all of these. Whoops. Typing speed. F2. There we go. So that hopefully should have renamed everything. So now these are all private variables, which is important because if we go over to our main here and I try to access my typewriter and I hit dot, you can see the only things we're able to access is the deleteAll, delete characters, pauseFor, start, and typestring, which is exactly what I want. I don't want to be able to change my typing speed, or I don't want to be able to access my queue from outside of this class because obviously that would give us problems. You know what? That really wasn't too difficult to solve. And if you want to be able to solve problems like that quickly and efficiently, you should definitely check out my JavaScript Simplified course linked down in the description because it really focuses on teaching you how to think through and solve complex problems so you can build any project you could think of. So again, check that out. It's linked down in the description below. With that said, thank you very much for watching and have a good day.